The red dust of planet Nexus 7 swirled around the Coalition base as Commander Zephrix walked through the rows of military tents. His 8-foot frame cast long shadows in the dying light of the alien sun. The chitinous plates covering his body clicked softly with each step, a sound that had terrified enemies across 3 star systems. All around him, warriors from dozens of worlds prepared for what many believed would be their final battle. The Vorthak horde had swept through the outer rim like a plague, destroying everything in their path. Entire civilizations had been wiped out in days. Now they were coming for the core worlds, and this ragged coalition was all that stood in there. Zephrix paused beside a weapons rack where a Garathi soldier named Stonefist Karen was checking his plasma cannon. The rock-skinned warrior stood 7 feet tall, his natural armor thick enough to stop most energy weapons. His people had evolved on a world where volcanic eruptions were daily events, forging them into living tanks. The new arrivals have set up camp near the south perimeter, Karen said without looking up from his weapon. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. Strange bunch. Never seen anything like them before. Zephrix's compound eyes shifted in the direction Karen indicated. Through the haze, he could see a small cluster of basic shelters that looked primitive compared to the advanced structures used by other coalition members. The shelters were simple fabric stretched over metal frames, held down by stakes driven into the ground. Which species? Zephrix asked, his mandibles clicking with curiosity. They call themselves humans, Karen replied. From some backwater world called Earth. Been trying to figure out how they even made it here. Their ships look like they were built in someone's garage. Zephrix had heard whispers about these humans over the past few days. Most coalition members assumed their inclusion was some kind of clerical error. The galaxy was vast, and sometimes, primitive species were accidentally included in military databases. It happened more often than most people knew. He decided to see for himself what kind of warriors Earth had sent to face the Vorthak. The walk to the human camp took him past representatives of the galaxy's most feared military forces. The Zeltrians had set up their energy shields in perfect geometric patterns, creating a maze of crackling barriers that could stop any known weapon. Their pale blue skin seemed to glow with stored power, and their movements were precise and calculated. Near them, the Nexari had established a maintenance area for their cybernetic implants. These warriors were more machine than flesh, their bodies enhanced with processors that could calculate battle outcomes in milliseconds. Their red optical sensors swept constantly across the landscape, analyzing threats that organic eyes might miss. The contrast when Zephrix reached the human camp was shocking. A group of perhaps 30 beings sat around small fires, eating from metal containers and talking in quiet voices. They were small by galactic standards, none taller than 6 feet. Their skin was soft and pink, lacking any natural armor or defensive adaptations. They wore simple green and brown clothing that looked like it would tear if a strong wind hit it. Zephrix watched as one of them stood up and walked toward him. The being was male with short brown hair and blue eyes. His face was unmarked by scars or battle modifications, making him look almost childlike compared to the hardened veterans Zephrix was used to commanding. "Evening, sir," the human said, his voice calm and respectful. "You must be Commander Zephrix. I'm Jake Morrison, squad leader for the human contingent." Zephrix studied the creature before him. Jake Morrison stood with his feet slightly apart, hands relaxed at his sides. His posture suggested confidence, but Zephrix couldn't understand where that confidence might come from. The human carried what appeared to be an ancient kinetic weapon, the kind that used chemical explosions to propel metal projectiles. Most species had abandoned such primitive technology centuries ago. "Human," Zephrix said, his translator converting his clicking speech into words Jake could understand. "I was not aware your species had achieved interstellar travel." "We're pretty new to the neighborhood," Jake admitted with what Zephrix would later learn was called a smile. "But we figured we should help out when we heard about the Vorthak problem." Behind Jake, other humans continued their simple activities. A female with red hair was cleaning weapons that looked like museum pieces. Another male with dark skin was studying a paper map, using actual ink marks on processed tree pulp instead of holographic displays. It was like stepping back in time to see how warfare was conducted in the ancient past. Your equipment appears. Zephrix paused, searching for a diplomatic way to express his concerns. Basic. It gets the job done, Jake replied. He gestured toward his rifle. This particular model has been reliable for over 50 years. Sometimes, the old ways work best. Zephrix found this attitude puzzling. In his experience, survival in combat depended on having the most advanced technology available. Species that fell behind in the arms race typically didn't survive long enough to develop space travel. Yet here were these humans, carrying weapons that belonged in a museum and wearing armor that looked like it was made from layered fabric. The Vorthak are not like enemies you may have faced on your world, Zephrix said, his voice taking on a serious tone. They are apex predators, evolved for killing. Their natural weapons can slice through reinforced steel. Their speed exceeds most enhanced reflexes. They have conquered civilizations that had been preparing for war for centuries. Jake nodded, thoughtfully. We've read the intelligence reports. They sound pretty tough. Tough? Zephrix's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or disbelief. Young human, they are death incarnate. Your primitive weapons and soft flesh will not protect you when they come. Maybe not, Jake said quietly. But we'll do our best. The casual way Jake accepted what amounted to a death sentence unsettled Zephrix. Either these humans didn't truly understand what they were facing, or they possessed some hidden capability that wasn't obvious from their appearance. Given their primitive technology and fragile biology, Zephrix suspected it was the former. As the two sons of Nexus 7 set behind the mountains, casting the camp in purple twilight, Zephrix made a decision that would haunt him. He would keep the humans away from the main battle. Perhaps they could handle supply duties or communications work, something that would keep them out of direct combat with the Vorthak. After all, what possible threat could such fragile creatures pose to the galaxy's most feared predators? He had no way of knowing that this question would soon be answered in ways that would shake his understanding of warfare, survival, and what it truly meant to be dangerous in an uncaring universe. The children of Earth carried secrets in their soft flesh and primitive weapons, secrets forged in the crucible of a world that had spent millions of years trying to kill them. But that revelation was still hours away, waiting in the depths of a Vorthak fortress where assumptions would be shattered and legends would be born. The main command tent buzzed with activity as representatives from every coalition species gathered for the mission briefing. Holographic displays showed the Vorthak fortress in painful detail, its twisted spires reaching into the toxic atmosphere of the dead world below. The structure pulsed with an organic rhythm that made it look more like a diseased heart than a military installation. Commander Zephrix stood at the head of the assembly, his chitinous frame commanding respect from the gathered warriors. To his right, the pale blue Zeltrian Captain Nova flickered with contained energy. Her species could channel raw power through their bodies, turning themselves into living weapons. On his left, Cyber General Rex of the Nexari processed battle, data through optical implants that glowed red in the dim light. Jake Morrison sat quietly in the back row with Lieutenant Amy Carter, his squad leader. Amy was a tall woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her green eyes constantly scanned the room, taking in every detail with the focus of a professional soldier. She carried the same primitive equipment as Jake, but something in her posture suggested she knew how to use it effectively. The mission parameters are straightforward, Zephrix began, his translator making his clicking speech understandable to all present. Intelligence indicates that the Vorthak are holding captured coalition personnel in the lower levels of this fortress. We need those prisoners alive, and we need the strategic data stored in their command center. A three-dimensional map appeared in the center of the tent, showing the fortress layout in gruesome detail. The corridors twisted like intestines, and the walls appeared to be made of some kind of living tissue. Pools of acid dotted the lower levels, and heat signatures indicated the presence of hundreds of Vorthak warriors. The Vorthak have had weeks to study our captured soldiers, continued Captain Nova, her voice crackling with barely contained electricity. They know our weaknesses, our equipment, our tactics. This will not be a simple rescue operation. Stone Fist. Karen raised one massive arm. What about defenses? My plasma cannon can punch through most barriers, but these biomechanical structures are unpredictable. The fortress walls regenerate damage within minutes, Cyber General Rex replied, streams of data flowing across his optical displays. Conventional. Heavy weapons will be ineffective for sustained assault. We need precision strikes and mobility. Jake listened to the tactical discussion with growing understanding. The coalition forces were planning to fight the Vorthak using the same methods that had failed for months across the Outer Rim. They were thinking like civilized beings facing other civilized beings, not recognizing that their enemy was something else entirely. Team composition will be critical, Zephrix announced. We need representatives from each major species to counter whatever adaptations the Vorthak have developed. His compound eyes swept across the assembled warriors. Gorathi for heavy assault, Zeltrian for energy projection, Nixari for tactical analysis and electronic warfare. He paused when his gaze reached the back of the tent where the humans sat. However, I question the wisdom of including certain less capable species in this operation. The clicking of his mandibles grew more pronounced. The Vorthak are apex predators. They have evolved specifically to kill. Sending inadequately equipped personnel against them is not bravery, it is suicide. Andawi, murmur ran through the assembled warriors. Some nodded in agreement while others looked uncomfortable with the direct challenge. Jake felt Amy tense beside him, but he placed a gentle hand on her arm. Commander Zephrix, Amy started, her voice steady but with an edge. My people have been fighting wars since before most species developed space travel. We might not have the fanciest equipment, but we know how to handle ourselves. Zephrix's attention focused on her like a weapon targeting system. Lieutenant Carter, your species lacks natural armor, enhanced reflexes, energy projection capabilities, or cybernetic augmentation. Your weapons use primitive chemical propulsion. Your armor appears to be made of woven fibers. He gestured toward Jake. This soldier here would not survive 30 seconds against a single Vorthak warrior. Captain Nova flickered brighter, electricity dancing across her pale skin. Perhaps the humans could handle communications duty, or supply coordination, something safely behind the lines. Their ships barely qualify as interstellar vessels, added Cyber General Rex, data streams indicating his analysis of human technology. Chemical rockets and metal alloys. No energy shields, no quantum processors, no adaptive materials. It is remarkable they reach this system at all. Stonefist Karen's rocky features arranged themselves into what might have been sympathy. No shame in knowing your limitations, small ones. Better to live and fight another day than die uselessly. Jake finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. What makes you think we would die uselessly? The question hung in the air like smoke. Zephrix leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the human section. Look at yourself, soft skin, Zephrix said, his tone mixing condescension with what he probably thought was kindness. Your flesh tears easily. Your bones break, under pressure that would not even bruise a Gorathi child. Your reflexes are slower than most species' standard baseline. Your weapons require manual aiming and mechanical triggers. He gestured broadly at the other coalition members. These warriors have been forged by evolution and technology into living weapons. Captain Nova can generate enough electrical discharge to power a city. Stone Fist Karen can punch through starship hulls with his bare hands. Cyber General Rex can process battlefield information faster than most organic brains can even perceive it. Zephrix's voice dropped to what he probably thought was a gentle tone. What exactly do you bring to this fight that justifies risking the mission? Jake looked around the tent, meeting the eyes of warriors who had dismissed him before he even spoke. Some showed pity, others showed impatience, but none showed respect. He had seen this before on other worlds, with other species who made the same assumptions. We bring ourselves, Jake said simply. That is not an answer. Zephrix clicked, impatiently. Your species possesses no obvious advantages. Your technology is centuries behind galactic standard. Your biology offers no defensive or offensive capabilities. What possible contribution could you make against enemies that have destroyed civilizations? Amy started to respond, but Jake shook his head slightly. Words would not convince these beings. They had looked at humans and seen weakness, frailty, inadequacy. They had made their judgment based on appearance and equipment, never considering that survival might come from sources they did not recognize. "Commander," Jake said, standing up slowly, "I understand your concerns. You see us as a liability, and based on your experience that makes sense. But maybe you should wait and see what happens before you decide what we can or cannot do." "The Vorthak will not wait for you to prove yourself," Zephrix replied coldly. "They will kill you in the first 30 seconds of contact, and then your death will distract other team members who might try to save you." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "That could happen, or maybe something else will happen. Maybe you will discover that your assumptions about humans are incomplete." The casual confidence in Jake's voice unsettled several coalition members. Here was a being that any of them could probably kill with one hand, speaking as if he possessed some hidden advantage. It made no tactical sense. "Very well," Zephrix said finally. "But I want it on record that I advised against including your species in this operation. When this mission fails because we had to waste resources protecting inadequate personnel, the responsibility lies with whoever authorized human participation." Jake sat back down, his expression unchanged. Amy looked like she wanted to say more, but Jake's calm acceptance of the challenge seemed to drain the tension from the situation. As the briefing continued with tactical details and equipment assignments, Zephrix found himself occasionally glancing at the human section. There was something about their quiet confidence that bothered him. Either they were too naive to understand the danger they faced, or they knew something he did not. Given their primitive appearance and technology, Zephrix was certain it was the former, but a small part of his mind wondered what would happen if he was wrong. The transport ship shuddered as it broke through the toxic atmosphere of the dead world. Through the viewports, the Coalition strike team could see the Vorthak fortress rising from the barren landscape like a cancerous growth. Its biomechanical walls pulsed with a sickly green light, and steam vented from various openings as if the structure were breathing. Commander Zephrix checked his weapons one final time. His plasma rifle hummed with contained energy, and the targeting system in. His compound eyes painted potential threat markers across his vision. Around him, the other Coalition members made their own preparations. Captain Nova's pale blue skin flickered with electrical discharge as she charged her internal power cells. Stone-Fist Karen tested the weight of his massive warhammer, its head crackling with contained plasma. Cyber General Rex ran final diagnostics on his enhanced systems, streams of data flowing across his optical displays. In the corner of the transport, Jake Morrison sat quietly with Amy Carter and two other humans. Jake was checking his rifle with the same careful attention the others gave their advanced weapons. His movements were precise and methodical, like someone who had performed this ritual thousands of times. "Landing in 30 seconds, announced the pilot. "Scans show minimal activity near the drop zone, but that could change quickly." The fortress loomed larger as they approached. Up close, its organic nature became even more disturbing. The walls were covered in what looked like veins, and sections of the exterior seemed to shift and move on their own. Steam rose from acid pools scattered around the base, and the air shimmered with toxic fumes. "Remember the plan," Zephrix said as the transport touched down. "Fast insertion, locate the prisoners, extract the intelligence, and get out. No heroics, no unnecessary risks." The strike team moved out into the harsh environment. The air was thick with chemical vapors that would have been lethal to most species, but their environmental suits filtered out the worst toxins. The humans wore simpler breathing masks that looked like they belonged in a mining operation rather than a military assault. The fortress entrance was a circular opening that dilated like an eye as they approached. Beyond it lay a corridor that curved out of sight, its walls covered in the same organic material as the exterior. Bioluminescent patches provided dim, shifting light that made shadows dance and twist. Zephrix led the way, his natural armor gleaming in the strange light. His enhanced senses detected no immediate threats, but something about the silence felt wrong. The Vorthak were never this quiet unless they were planning something. They had moved about 50 meters into the fortress when they encountered their first obstacle. The corridor ended at a circular chamber with no visible exits. The floor was covered in a thick, viscous liquid that bubbled and steamed. Across the chamber, perhaps 50 feet away, another corridor entrance was visible. "Energy bridge?" suggested Captain Nova, electricity crackling between her fingers. "Negative," replied Cyber General Rex after scanning the chamber. "The walls contain bioelectrical dampeners. Energy-based solutions will be absorbed and redistributed." Stone Fist Karen hefted his hammer. "I could smash a path through the wall." "That would bring every Vorthak in the fortress down on us," Zephrix said. He studied the chamber, his tactical systems running through possible solutions. All of them involved complex equipment or abilities that would take time to implement. Jake stepped forward and pulled a simple device from his pack. It looked like a metal hook attached to a length of rope, ancient by galactic standards. Before anyone could object, he aimed at a structural beam visible on the far side of the chamber and fired. The hook sailed across the gap and caught firmly. Jake tested the line with a sharp tug, then began climbing hand over hand across the chamber. The other coalition members watched in fascination as the human moved with smooth, efficient motions. "That creature will fall to its death, Stonefist," Karen muttered. "Those soft limbs cannot support that kind of strain." But Jake reached the other side without apparent effort. He secured the line and gestured for the others to follow. One by one, they used their advanced equipment to cross the gap while Jake waited patiently. "How did you know that beam would support the weight?" Zephrix asked when he reached the other side. Jake was already coiling his rope. "Looked solid enough. Sometimes the simple solution works best." They continued deeper into the fortress. The corridors twisted and branched like arteries, and the walls seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Strange sounds echoed from hidden chambers, and occasionally they glimpsed movement in the shadows that vanished when they turned to look directly at it. "Motion detected ahead," Cyber General Rex announced. 3 contacts, moving in standard Vorthak patrol formation. The team took cover behind a bend in the corridor. Through his enhanced optics, Zephrix could see 3 Vorthak warriors approaching. Each stood 7 feet tall, their insectoid bodies covered in natural armor that could deflect most energy weapons. Their razor-sharp claws gleamed in the dim. Light and acid dripped from their mandibles. "Standard engagement protocol," Zephrix whispered. "Nova provides covering fire. Karen flanks left. Rex coordinates targeting data. We hit them fast and hard before they can alert others." The coalition members began positioning themselves for attack when Jake suddenly moved. Before anyone could stop him, he stepped around the corner and walked directly toward the approaching Vorthak patrol. "What is that soft skin doing?" Captain Nova hissed, electricity dancing across her skin. Zephrix watched in horror as Jake approached the 3 deadly predators. The human should have been torn apart instantly, but something strange was happening. Jake moved with a fluid grace. That seemed almost supernatural, his steps completely silent on the organic floor. The lead Vorthak warrior noticed Jake and let out a shriek that should have alerted the entire fortress. But the sound was cut short as Jake somehow appeared beside the creature and drove his primitive knife into a gap in its armor that none of the coalition databases had identified as a vulnerable point. The second Vorthak leaped at Jake with inhuman speed, its claws extended to disembowel the fragile human. But Jake was no longer where the creature expected him to be. He had moved like flowing water, redirecting the alien's momentum to send it crashing into the wall with bone-crushing force. The third Vorthak, seeing its packmates fall, turned to flee. Jake's hand moved in a blur and his knife flew through the air with deadly precision, dropping the creature before it could take 3 steps. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. Jake calmly retrieved his weapons and checked the corridor ahead for more threats. When he looked back at the coalition team, his expression was matter-of-fact, as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Clear ahead," he reported quietly. "We should keep moving before more patrols arrive." Zephrix stared at the 3 dead Vorthak warriors. These were apex predators, creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for generations. A single Vorthak could take on multiple coalition soldiers and win. Yet this human had eliminated 3 of them with tools that belonged in a museum. "How did you move like that?" Zephrix demanded. "How did you know about the weakness in their armor?" Jake glanced at the bodies with the same casual attention he might give to fallen leaves. "Everything that lives has joints and weak spots. You just have to know where to look and how to move." As they continued deeper into the fortress, Zephrix found himself watching Jake Morrison with new eyes. The human still looked fragile and primitive, but something fundamental had changed in the way he moved through the dangerous environment. He seemed to flow between shadows, his steps making no sound, his presence somehow becoming less noticeable even though he was right there. Captain Nova leaned close to Zephrix as they walked. "Did you see how fast he moved?" "My enhanced reflexes barely tracked him." Stone-Fist Karen nodded grimly. "And that throw, perfect accuracy at full speed. I could not have made that shot with my targeting systems." Cyber General Rex processed the engagement data with visible confusion. "According to my analysis, what we just witnessed should have been impossible given human physical parameters." Zephrix said nothing, but deep in his mind, a terrible possibility was beginning to take shape. What if everything the Coalition thought they knew about humans was wrong? What if these creatures were not the weakest species in the galaxy, but something else entirely? Something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The deeper sections of the Vorthak fortress were a nightmare of twisted metal and living tissue. The walls sweated a clear fluid that hissed when it hit the floor, and strange sounds echoed from hidden chambers. Bioluminescent growths provided patches of sickly light that made everything look diseased and wrong. Commander Zephrix led the strike team through corridors that seemed designed to disorient and terrify. His compound eyes constantly scanned for threats, but the organic architecture made his targeting systems unreliable. Nothing in his military training had prepared him for fighting inside what was essentially a living creature. Behind him, Jake Morrison moved with the same quiet confidence he had shown since entering the fortress. The human seemed completely unbothered by the disturbing environment, as if walking through alien biomechanical structures was something he did every day. "Contact ahead," Cyber General Rex announced quietly. "Large chamber, multiple heat signatures, at least 12 Vorthak warriors, possibly more." The team approached a wide opening that led into a circular chamber perhaps 100 feet across. The floor was covered in pools of bubbling acid, and twisted metal beams created a maze of obstacles. Vorthak warriors moved through the space with predatory grace, their razor claws gleaming in the dim light. "This is where they are holding the prisoners," Captain Nova whispered, electricity crackling softly across her pale skin. "I can detect Coalition life signs in the lower level." Zephrix studied the tactical situation. 12 Vorthak warriors was more than their small team could handle using conventional methods. The creatures were positioned to cover all approaches, and the acid pools would limit their movement options. A direct assault would be suicide. "We need to draw them out," he decided. "Create a distraction in another part of the fortress, then move in when they investigate." "That will take too long," Amy Carter said quietly. "By the time we set up a diversion and circle back, they might have moved the prisoners." Stone-Fist Karen hefted his warhammer. "Or we could charge in fighting. Better to die with honor than sneak around like scavengers and get everyone killed in the process," Cyber General Rex replied. "My analysis shows a 12% chance of success with a direct assault." While the Coalition members debated tactics, Jake was studying the chamber with the intense focus of a predator evaluating prey. His blue eyes tracked the movement patterns of the Vorthak warriors, noting how they positioned themselves and where they looked for threats. "How many shots do you have in that rifle?" Amy asked him quietly. 30 rounds, Jake replied without taking his eyes off the chamber. "Plus what everyone else is carrying." Amy understood immediately. In their squad, ammunition was shared freely between team members. It was a practical arrangement born from using weapons that required physical projectiles instead of energy cells. "That is not enough firepower to eliminate 12 Vorthak," Zephrix said when he overheard the exchange. "You would need at least 3 times that amount, and perfect accuracy under combat conditions." Jake looked at him with an expression that Might have been amusement. Commander, with respect, I think you are still not understanding what humans are. Before anyone could ask what he meant, Jake stepped into the chamber. The lead Vorthak warrior spotted him immediately and let out a shriek that echoed off the organic walls. The sound should have brought every enemy in the fortress running, but Jake seemed completely unconcerned by the noise. The Vorthak charged with the speed that had made them the most feared predators in the galaxy. Their claws could slice through starship armor, and their reflexes were faster than most enhanced species could track. They moved like flowing death, covering the distance to Jake in seconds. What happened next shattered every assumption the Coalition had made about human capabilities. Jake did not retreat or seek cover like any sensible fragile being would do. Instead, he moved forward to meet the charging aliens. But he moved in a way that defied explanation. His body seemed to flow like water, each step perfectly placed, each motion serving multiple purposes. The first Vorthak warrior swung its razor, claws in an arc that should have disemboweled Jake from chest to hip, but Jake was no longer there. He had somehow slipped under the attack and come up behind the creature, his knife finding the exact spot where the alien's neck joined its torso. The Vorthak dropped without another sound. The second and third warriors attacked from different angles, trying to overwhelm Jake with coordinated strikes. But Jake moved between their attacks like he could see the future. He redirected one creature's momentum to send it crashing into an acid pool, while simultaneously putting 3 rounds from his rifle into the other's central nervous system. More Vorthak rushed to join the fight, but Jake had already moved to a position where they could only approach one at a time. He used the chamber's layout against them, forcing the aliens to navigate around obstacles while he picked them off with surgical precision. Captain Nova watched in stunned amazement as Jake eliminated warrior after warrior with weapons that should have been useless against Vorthak armor. How is he finding their weak points? Our databases show no vulnerabilities in those locations. He is not using databases, Cyber General Rex said, his optical implants working frantically to process what he was seeing. He is reading their body language, their movement patterns. He is predicting where they will attack and how they will defend. Stonefist Karen stared as Jake threw his knife with impossible accuracy, dropping a Vorthak warrior that was trying to flank him from 50 feet away. That throw required calculations my targeting computer could not make in real time. A Vorthak warrior managed to get close enough to rake its claws across Jake's arm, tearing through his primitive armor and drawing blood. But instead of slowing him down, the injury seemed to sharpen his focus. He moved even faster, even more precisely, as if pain was just another piece of information to be processed and used. The remaining Vorthak warriors, seeing their packmates falling one by one, tried a desperate coordinated rush from all sides. But Jake had been waiting for exactly this moment. He moved to the center of the chamber and began what could only be described as a dance of death. He flowed between the attacking creatures like smoke, each movement calculated to maximum effect. A knee strike here disabled a warrior's balance, allowing him to put a bullet in its brain. A redirect there sent one attacker into another, creating an opening for his knife. Every motion served multiple purposes. Every action led to the next. When the last Vorthak warrior fell, Jake stood alone in the center of the chamber, breathing slightly harder, but otherwise unmarked, except for the cut on his arm. Around him lay 12 of the galaxy's most feared predators, eliminated in less than 3 minutes by a being the Coalition had dismissed as primitive and weak. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake calmly reloaded his rifle and checked the chamber for additional threats. When he was satisfied they were alone, he looked back at the Coalition team that was still frozen in shock at the chamber entrance. "Prisoners should be in the lower level," he said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "We should move quickly before reinforcements arrive." Zephrix found his voice after several seconds. "How did you do that? What you just accomplished should have been impossible." Jake walked over to retrieve his knife from where it had dropped with the final Vorthak warrior. "Commander, I tried to tell you before. You keep thinking of humans as weak because we do not have natural armor or energy weapons or cybernetic implants. But you are measuring us against the wrong things." He gestured at the dead Vorthak surrounding them. "These creatures are apex predators on their world. But Earth has apex predators too. And for millions of years, humans were not at the top of the food chain. We were prey. Amy Carter joined him in the chamber, stepping carefully around the acid pools. Every predator on our world was bigger, stronger, faster, and more dangerous than we were. Our ancestors survived by becoming something different. Something that could outthink, outadapt, and outlast anything that tried to kill them. Jake checked his weapon and looked at the opening that led to the lower levels. The Vorthak evolved to be perfect killers. But humans evolved to kill perfect killers. We spent millions of years learning how to hunt things that should have been able to hunt us. The revelation hit the coalition members like a physical blow. They had been looking at humans as a weak species that needed protection, never realizing they were traveling with descendants of the most successful persistence hunters in galactic history. You are not prey, Zephrix said slowly, understanding, beginning to dawn in his compound eyes. You are predators, natural-born predators. Jake smiled, and for the first time, Zephrix saw it for what it really was. Not the expression of a harmless creature, but the hunting grin of something that had evolved to kill without hesitation or mercy. Now you are beginning to understand, Jake said quietly. Shall we go get those prisoners? The lower level of the Vorthak fortress was a chamber of horrors that made the upper sections look welcoming. Rows of cage-like structures lined the walls, each containing coalition prisoners who had been captured during earlier battles. The captives were from dozens of species, their advanced armor and weapons stripped away, leaving them vulnerable and afraid. But what made Commander Zephrix's blood run cold was not the sight of the prisoners. It was what the Vorthak had done with them. Along one wall, detailed holographic displays showed anatomical breakdowns of every major coalition species. The Vorthak had been studying their captives, learning about their biology, their weaknesses, their equipment. Each display contained information that could be used to develop specific weapons and tactics designed to counter coalition advantages. They have been preparing for total war, Cyber General Rex said, his optical implants processing the vast amount of data. Every species in the coalition has been analyzed. They know how to defeat our energy shields, how to bypass our armor, how to jam our cybernetic systems. Captain Nova's pale skin flickered with angry electricity as she examined a display showing Zeltrian nervous system vulnerabilities. They know exactly how to disrupt our power generation. A targeted electromagnetic pulse in the right frequency would leave us helpless. Stonefist Karen stared at detailed scans of Garathi bone structure. They have found stress points in our natural armor, places where focused pressure could cause catastrophic fractures. Jake moved between the displays, with growing understanding. The Vorthak had not been randomly attacking coalition worlds. They had been conducting a systematic study, learning everything they needed to know to wipe out every species that opposed them. There is no data on humans, Amy Carter observed, checking display after display. Nothing about our biology, our tactics, our equipment. Because they have never captured any of us before, Jake replied quietly. We are the one variable they have not accounted for. Alarms suddenly began wailing throughout the fortress. Emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red, and the organic walls began to contract rhythmically. Somewhere in the upper levels, reinforcements were mobilizing. We need to move, Zephrix said, his tactical systems calculating how long they had before the fortress became impossible to escape. Free the prisoners, download the intelligence data, and get out. The rescue became a race against time. Coalition members used their advanced tools to break open the prison cells while Jake and Amy provided security. The freed prisoners were weak from captivity, but most could still move under their own power. It was when they reached the central command chamber that everything went wrong. The room erupted with Vorthak warriors as hidden panels slid open in the walls and ceiling. Dozens of the creatures poured into the space, their razor claws gleaming and acid dripping from their mandibles. But these were not ordinary Vorthak soldiers. These warriors were equipped with specialized weapons designed specifically to counter coalition forces. Energy dampeners that could neutralize Zeltrian electrical attacks, acid sprayers calibrated to dissolve Garathi armor, electromagnetic pulse generators that could shut down Nexari cybernetic systems. The Coalition forces found themselves helpless against enemies that knew exactly how to defeat them. Captain Nova tried to generate an electrical discharge, but her power was immediately absorbed by dampening fields. Stonefist Karen swung his warhammer, only to have the weapon dissolve in a spray of targeted acid. Cyber General Rex's systems flickered and died as electromagnetic pulses scrambled his processors. They know everything about us, Zephrix realized, with growing horror. Every tactic, every weapon, every defense, they have counters for all of it. But the Vorthak had made one critical mistake. They had no countermeasures for Jake Morrison and his fellow humans, because they had never encountered anything like them before. Jake moved through the chaos like a force of nature, his primitive weapons and ancient tactics completely outside the Vorthak understanding of warfare. They had prepared for energy weapons and found kinetic projectiles. They had expected cybernetic precision and found organic intuition. They had planned for logical tactical doctrine and found pure evolved lethality. Amy Carter flanked left while Jake went right, the two humans moving with a coordination that needed no electronic communication. They used the fortress's own architecture against the Vorthak, turning environmental hazards into weapons and exploiting weaknesses that no database had cataloged. The other humans in the team fought with the same deadly efficiency. They moved, like pack hunters, each covering the others, each action flowing seamlessly into the next. Their weapons were simple, but their tactics were refined by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. As the battle raged, the freed Coalition prisoners watched in amazement. These were the same creatures they had dismissed as primitive and weak, now fighting with a skill that surpassed anything they had ever seen. A massive Vorthak war leader entered the chamber, standing 9 feet tall and covered in armor that had deflected heavy weapons fire. It carried weapons specifically designed to kill humans, based on theoretical analysis of their apparent vulnerabilities. But the Vorthak theories were wrong. Jake faced the war leader in single combat, his simple knife and rifle against the aliens' advanced weaponry. The fight was brutal and swift. The Vorthak used every advantage it possessed, but Jake fought like something that had been born to kill apex predators. When the war leader fell, the remaining Vorthak warriors began to retreat. For the first time in their species' history, they had encountered something they could not understand or defeat. The Coalition team fought their way out of the fortress with Jake and the other humans leading the charge. As their transport lifted off from the dead world, Zephrix looked back at the Vorthak stronghold with new understanding. "Send an immediate message to Coalition Command," he ordered. "Priority Alpha classification." "What should the message say, Commander?" asked the communications officer. Zephrix watched Jake Morrison treating wounded Coalition soldiers with the same calm efficiency he had shown in combat. The human was covered in injuries that would have killed most species, but he continued working, as if pain was just another piece of information to be processed. "Tell them we need to revise our assessment of human capabilities," Zephrix said slowly. "Tell them the Vorthak have never faced anything like Earth's children, and after today, I understand why that might be our greatest advantage." He paused, still trying to process what he had witnessed. "Tell them that humans are not the weakest species in our coalition. They may be the most dangerous beings in the galaxy." As the transport jumped to hyperspace, carrying news that would change everything, Jake Morrison sat quietly in the corner, cleaning his simple weapons with the same methodical care he had shown from the beginning. He caught Zephrix watching him and offered that same calm smile. But now Zephrix saw it for what it truly was. The expression of a natural-born killer, evolved on a world that had spent millions of years trying to create the perfect predator, and somehow, impossibly, that predator looked exactly like a fragile, primitive human being. The galaxy would never be the same once word spread about what humans could really do. The Vorthak had made the mistake of underestimating Earth's children, and that mistake would cost them everything. Because when death walked on 2 legs and carried simple weapons, even apex predators learned to fear the dark.